Let's turn to the Strait of Hormuz, where vessels are now moving days ahead of Friday's signing ceremony of the deal to end fighting in Iran. Now, boats were seen at sea around the vital oil route early this morning. You can see them there. U.S. officials say the memo of understanding has been signed electronically by both sides. At the G7 summit earlier, President Trump addressed the new agreement with Iran. Here's what he said about the negotiation period as it kicks off.
It's a 60-day period or so. I think it's going to happen fairly on time. We've been both involved. I think they're going to want to get it done. Iran wants to get it done. They have to get back to business. And the relationship is now normalized. So I think it's going to go pretty quickly.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is in Geneva covering that summit. So, Nancy, we still don't have the language of the agreement. I'm sure you are probably very eager to get your hands on that and pour through it. Where does the agreement stand, though, ahead of this signing ceremony? And could the fighting in Lebanon derail it at all? Because that's another component of this.
Well, President Trump clearly seems to be concerned that the fighting in Lebanon could somehow hamper the plans for this signing on Friday, because he lashed out in a way we haven't seen before publicly against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during one of his bilateral meetings here on Lake Geneva a little earlier today. You know, we've seen reports before of President Trump venting and lashing out against Netanyahu on the phone behind closed doors. But this time, for the first time, we heard him saying things aloud like Israel is fighting for too long and too many people are getting killed. He said that an attack the other day on Beirut was vicious and that sometimes you can do too much. Take a listen to something else that he had to say about Israel in his meeting today.
Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody. I suggested to Israel to let Syria take care of Hezbollah. Because to be honest with you, I think they do a better job of doing it.
So you could almost hear the anger in his voice there. And what President Trump has made clear in the past is that he understands that sometimes the U.S. goals and Israeli goals diverge when it comes to this war, but that he always expects Netanyahu to place his goals secondary to Trump's at the end of the day. And clearly, at this point, he doesn't believe that that's happening. Whereas Israel, I should add, argues that it is simply defending itself and that they are going to keep troops in southern Lebanon as long as they feel that they need to.
You, Nancy, sat down with the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross. What did she tell you about the impact of this war?
Well, she said she's very hopeful that the fighting will now be over and that the strait will be reopened, because it has had a major effect on their ability to pre-position supplies over the past few months. She said that obviously the cost of supplies has gone up, but also it's been difficult to do things like get airplanes insured so that they can make flights where they need to go. This is an agency that depends on the ability to pre-position humanitarian aid months ahead of time in hotspots around the world. And if the supply chain is tangled up, if the price of fuel goes up, all of that becomes more difficult. Take a listen. How has the strait being closed all of these months affected humanitarian pressure points around the world?
Mainly by increasing fuel prices. This is a big impact. We have difficulties getting fuel for some of our planes.
This is a position we've heard echoed by European leaders here at the G7 summit, who may not have agreed with President Trump's decision to go to war, but are nevertheless very glad that the war appears to be ending, because it has taken such a toll on economic growth here in Europe.
All right, Nancy Cordes reporting from Geneva for us. Nancy, thank you. For a closer look, we're joined by Will Todman. He's a senior fellow in the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Will, thanks so much for being with us. So, speaking at the G7 summit this morning, the president took aim at President Obama's 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. Let's listen to that.
unlike Obama, who could have destroyed the Middle East with a horrible JCPOA, it is the worst agreement. That was a road to a nuclear weapon. Mine is a wall against a nuclear weapon.
All right, so as you know, Will, the Obamas live rent-free in the president's head, but the fact is that the Middle East was not destroyed in the wake of that agreement. Whether there are some policy decisions that people took umbrage with or didn't agree with, it's very different than what the president is suggesting. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, gas prices are rising, and so help our audience understand what the difference is between this potential tentative deal and what the Obama-era agreement had in place.
It's very difficult to say because the negotiations on the nuclear file have not fully happened yet. After this framework agreement is signed, which we understand will happen on Friday, then it will kickstart a 60-day period in which the negotiations on the nuclear file will take place. And until we know the details of that, it's really hard to make specific comparisons between what this Trump deal and the past Obama deal will have achieved. But they're likely to look very similar in many ways. Both of them will probably have a cap on Iran's ability to enrich uranium. Both of them involved limits on the stockpiles of highly enriched uranium, and both of them included sanctions relief and other kinds of economic incentives. So President Trump is going to be really keen to try to draw differences, but I think that's going to be a difficult job because in many ways it's going to look very similar. One of the differences, though, is that this time the regional states, particularly Arab Gulf states, are very supportive of this deal. Their economies have been roiled by this war. They have been struck by thousands of attacks from Iran, and they want to see this end. So now they are supportive of an agreement with Iran. They believe now that they have to live with Iran going forward. And that's a real difference because under the JCPOA that President Obama signed, they were actually strongly opposed to the nuclear deal, but I think that shows just how much they've suffered during this conflict.
So to that point, this agreement kicks off a 60-day period of negotiations. They've got to sort out some really big issues, including Iran's nuclear program. But you just did point out that there's a little bit of a different environment because of those surrounding Middle Eastern countries. They've been brought into this. They might maybe even apply pressure. What's your assessment of whether both sides can land a lasting deal in 60 days? That feels quite quick.
I think it is very unlikely that there will be a comprehensive deal within 60 days. And that's partly because President Trump has now given up a key piece of his leverage, which is the threat of military action. I think the Iranians know that President Trump is only going to grow less likely to strike again as we get closer to the midterms. And so now, in some ways, these negotiations are happening without the key aspect of U.S. leverage. Of course, the U.S. is also agreeing to lift its blockade on shipping coming from Iran. That was another key source of its leverage. And the Iranians are very good at negotiating. They're very good at dragging things out, making things difficult. And they've been here before. And so I think they're going to try every trick they can to make this go slower, to avoid giving up these major concessions. So, yeah, I think it is unlikely. And it's important to remember that when the JCPOA was signed under President Obama in 2015, that came at the conclusion of more than 2 years of technical negotiations. The technical details of this are really difficult, and I just think it's very unlikely that they will be agreed to in 60 days.
So, Will, the other factor that we've not talked about is Israel and how they factor into this. The Iranians are already signaling that they're not even going to begin whatever this is, right? This trigger to the 60-day negotiations unless the Israelis pull out of Lebanon. The Israelis have not signaled that they're planning on doing that. The president is, he's sort of hitting back at the Israelis, or at least speaking in a more forceful language than we've heard him use in the past. But I don't think that that's going to necessarily sway Prime Minister Netanyahu.
No, Lebanon is the key issue to watch, I think, and has the real potential to derail all of this. And I don't think it is a hyperbole to say that we're now witnessing an unprecedented rift between the interests of the United States and of Israel. President Trump's key interest is to make this deal stick now, to ensure that it is upheld, to ensure that we do get to those nuclear negotiations, to buy time, to buy calm, and to try to settle the global economy. But for Prime Minister Netanyahu, this deal is a disaster. I think he is very concerned about the future of Iran's nuclear program, but also the fact that this deal does not touch on Iran's ballistic missile program or its support for its proxies and partners across the region. So we're going to see a real rift growing there.
Will, really quickly, 30 seconds before you go. So you mentioned something interesting. You said that the United States has lost a key leverage point, which is the use of military action. But it strikes me that the Iranians still retain their key lever, which is being able to close or open the strait without worrying about military action now from the United States.
That's an important point, because in some ways, there's been a lot of analysis saying that we're just back to where we were before this war started. But that's not actually true, because now Iran knows that it has the ability to close down the Strait of Hormuz at any point in the future. And so I think that they know they have this sort of amazing card of leverage to play. But that's where I think some of the discussions at the G7 come in, where we're seeing reports of a coalition of countries that will try to secure the strait and ensure that we don't get to the point again where Iran can threaten it. But it's going to be tricky to ensure that Iran never is tempted to turn to that, to play that card again going forward. Now they know the impact it's had.
And of course, if those assets are unfrozen, that also gives them money to then continue to fund the proxies.
That's right.
We could talk about this forever. Will Todman, thank you so much for your expertise.
Thanks for having me.